Cool. So, Jakko, thank you so much for joining us. This guitar is not one I've seen before. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about it.
I was at home in my studio one morning and the phone rang, and it was Paul Reed-Smith, who'd just gotten round to listening to my last solo record and was talking about how it sounded, the actual sound of it. Paul's kind of obsessed with equipment and those kind of details, nerdy details. So we discussed that because he said he loved the sound of it. And I don't know, it was just a very sweet, lovely phone call, and I didn't think anything more of it. And then about half an hour later, I got a phone call from the factory, and they said, Paul's just asked us to build you a new guitar. Oh, okay. And I said, well, what can I have this? Whatever you want. So I chose the shape, which is the shape they use for it's called a mirror, right? Because I liked that double cutaway thing. So I got two outputs, one dealing with the magnetic pickups. And I put it into the Helix because you can treat each signal individually, process them, and then save them as a patch, so you can cut the thing in or out. And it's kind of slim neck profile. And I went to see an old friend of mine, a guy called Phil Smith, who's an album sleeve designer, about, coming up with an image. Because as you know, the previous guitars they made, there's the original King Crimson album cover on one, and then there's a cover of one of the live albums on another, the Cyclops. And Phil said to me, what are you thinking of doing? And I said, well, as a kid, I was obsessed with Eric Clapton's SG, the Fool, which did I read in the last couple of days has just sold for like $3 million or something in an auction. And so Phil said, well, look, why don't we take that kind of colour scheme and go with something? And then he had this mad idea. He said he had a book full of products from India in the 60s and 70s, I think. So these are like rice packets and poppadom packets. And he made this amazing collage, which I thought was brilliant. And this, the blue and this kind of the purple thing as it becomes like a sunburst. And there's, I don't know if you can see it, there's a little in joke here. That's my Lego figure that I bunged in there. And Phil also came up with this really beautiful logo. It's kind of Indian looking logo. And the guys at the factory phoned me and said, it looks really cool, that, but he said, I think it's wasted on the truss rod cover. So he said, well, we had an idea. Well, why don't we put it on the back of the neck? So there it is. So I'm thrilled with it. Plays great, feels great, and sounds rubbish.
Well, evidently not, but based on the track you just played. So I know that you like to have a piezo as well as magnetic pickups in your guitars.
Yeah.
Could you show us some of the sounds that you get by blending them?
I've got like a kind of basic, when I'm replicating the acoustic stuff, I mean, I've got so I mix, so that's my kind of clean neck pickup, and then I mix that with the pizza. So you get that high end, that presence,
I mean, presumably, well, I know in a lot of Crimson stuff there's, some really interesting extended chords, there's sort of interesting intervals. Does having that extra definition from the acoustic voice overlaid on the magnetic pickup, does that let you articulate some of those?
I think so, especially especially when we're replicating the early stuff, all the... So I've used a stupid sound there, but so you're kind of getting an acoustic definition and a bit of warmth from the other side. And as I said, the fact that you can treat both of those with separate processing, but save it as a patch is brilliant. Prior to that, I was using an alternative digital amp, but because of the nature of the band, we're at the back and there's 3 drummers at the front, so we can't use speaker cabinets because the first thing it's going to hit is 3 lots of overheads, and so I had the piezo on a separate, either a volume control or an off switch, and I kept forgetting to either turn it on or turn it off. Whereas, so this is great. So it does it for me, you know. You go to another sound and the piezo's not in it at all, you know.
Yeah, so I mean, this isn't the first guitar that we've worked on with PRS. So tell us about some of the other guitars that join you on stage alongside this one.
Well, they're all 24 fret. They're all very similar. The same neck profile, same the piezo. String goes. I don't want to think. Oh, hang on, this is a shorter scale. I want it to feel exactly the same. You know, in the middle of a Crimson gig where you've got enough to concentrate about without having any. So I've been carrying those. I've been carrying when we were doing some older stuff from Lizard. I was using a big semi-acoustic Gibson semi that I found in a shop in Amsterdam. It was a guitar I'd seen pictures of, but I'd never seen in real life. It's a 150D, which looks, if you look at it front on, it looks like a 335. You look at it side on, it's the same depth as a 175. So it's like a big jazz-bodied thing, and that I love playing that. So yeah, in essence, I'm just really taking I use one guitar really. The other's just the spare, apart from the semi-acoustic.
Going back through time, how have your sort of tastes in electric guitars, or your preferences, I should say, evolved? Where did you start out professionally? What were you playing then, and what did you learn along the way that eventually led you to want this kind of instrument?
Well, it's a combination of emulating your heroes and finding your own thing, I think. You know, we all go down that path of, I've got to get the exact gear that guy has, and you spend a fortune and you think, I still don't sound like him. And it's funny how long it takes you to realise, hang on, it's in your head and your fingers, it doesn't matter what. I remember seeing Alan Holdsworth play in a pub, and he borrowed somebody's Telecaster, and I thought, well, that's ridiculous. And of course it sounded like Alan Holdsworth because it was Alan Holdsworth playing it. I always loved SGs, you know, just this aesthetically, it seemed to have this kind of more middly tone that the Les Pauls, you know, didn't have. I thought they looked great, you know, and lots of people I liked played them. So I had lots of guitar. I've always had kind of, you know, double cutaway guitars with access, really. So I'm trying to think. I had a Yamaha very early on when I was in my teens. And then the guy in the band I was with made a new body for it. And then I started using Gordon Smith's. Same thing, but that was like a Les Paul, double cutaway Les Paul Gemini. I love that guitar. I wished I hadn't sold it. Well, I cocked it up by putting... actually, their tremolo system was great. It was like a huge, kind of very heavy spring, but it really stayed in tune. And it was the early 80s, so I succumbed to fashion and gouged half the bloody guitar out to put a Kahler in it, and it really screwed the sound of it up, you know. And like many guitar players, you know, you're constantly after a new thing. You can never have too many guitars, and then the tax bill comes in, so you flog them. And some of the guitars I had to sell for bugger all that are now, I can't afford to replace them now. I had a beautiful white SG custom, well, Les Paul 1961 gold, you know. I mean, that's about 20 grand if I want to buy one of those back. And I had this fantastic, I had an acoustic, semi-acoustic band called Dysrhythmia with Gavin Harrison and Danny Thompson and some Indian musicians. And I bought this beautiful 1951 175 Tobacco Sunburst with a single Alnico pickup on the bridge That was lovely. Again, I wished I hadn't sold that. And also, when I was a kid, I was a big fan of the whole Canterbury music thing, and Dave Stewart, the keyboard player in particular, who I was very fortunate to end up working with. But I used to buy albums. He was on them, and one of the albums he was on was a thing called Fish Rising by Steve Hillage, and on the back cover is a picture of Steve Hillage standing by a river playing an SG Junior, and I did think that was the coolest looking guitar I'd ever seen, and I bought it off him. I had that very guitar, flogged that too, and I really wished I kept that, but yeah, you live and learn, don't you? So I played Steinbergers for a while. They don't have the romance or the that aesthetic thing, but as a working instrument they were brilliant. And I loved the transposing tremolo arm thing was fantastic. I didn't like the look of them, but they were just so reliable, and the strings cut to length and all of that. The thing didn't go out of tune really. So that's what I played when I was in level 42. I played those.
What was the experience like of playing in level 42? Because I mean, that's they're great musicians in that band, and the music is so beautifully written and so well put together. What was it like stepping into that?
It was an extraordinary thing. I tell this story. I don't know if we've got time for this. You can always edit it out. But I'd made an album with Tom Robinson. Do you remember Tom Robinson? And it got great reviews, and it came out as both of us. And I think it was Tom partly thinking, this isn't normally the kind of stuff. So if this is really unsuccessful, I would like to share the blame. So it came out as the two of us instead of just him. And it was on a small label, so they didn't have much in the way of PR. And I remember they called me and said, look, we've got you a live TV. I said, oh, brilliant. What is it? And they told me what it was. And I said, I'm not doing that. And they said, why not? I said, because it's rubbish. And it was a program called the James Whale Radio Show, which was a kind of precursor to the kind of shock jock nonsense. And people that don't remember it, I asked them, do you remember the word? And I said, well, what a chaotic nightmare that was. Well, this show was like the word, but without the budget. It was like a low budget version. And I said, I'm not doing it. And the next day, Tom phoned me up and said, would I please do it as a favour to him? And I thought, okay. And I remember it was filmed in Leeds, and I remember packing the gear up in the car and driving there and resenting every single mile and getting there. And sure enough, it was a big thing. They'd got this, the discussion at the time was about Clause 28, which is this whole Tory thing about banning the promotion of homosexuality in schools. So they'd got Tom there to talk about it, along with this really pompous Tory guy who was director of some kind of families for conservatives type thing. So I thought, this is grim. Anyway, we did this number, which I programmed some stuff, but the rest was played live. So, I sang, played guitar, did a solo in the middle, and then I went home, and I thought, what a nightmare that was. And then about 4 months later, I woke up one morning and there was the post had just arrived, and there was a brown envelope from the Inland Revenue informing me that I'd been referred to the bankruptcy division. And I thought, well, that's it. I've lost everything. And I remember trying to make a cup of tea and the milk was off, and thinking, and I went to the local shop and bought some milk, came back. My answer phone light was flashing when I got back, and I pressed play, and it was Mark King from Level 42. I'd never spoken to in my life, saying, can you give me a ring? It's urgent. It's pretty important. Can you call me on this number? And I phoned the number, and he went through the recent history of, Al Murphy, who died, and then Alan Holdsworth, who did a stint. He did 15 shows with him at Hammersmith. And he said, we need a permanent guitar player, someone who's prepared to commit to at least 2 years. And I said, well, you're asking me to come and audition? He went, no, the job's yours. Do you want it? I went, what? Yeah. And it saved my bacon, It stopped me going bankrupt. It stopped me losing the house, the studio, everything. And it was ages later when we were on the road and I'd got to know Mark quite well. And I said, every guitar player in the country wanted that gig because, as you say, it's that rare thing of it's a band that has a reputation for being really good players, but is also commercially very successful. I said, how did I get? He said, well, a couple of people recommended you, that I respect. And I said, who's that? And one was a guy called Julian Mendelssohn, who's an engineer who co-produced their previous album, and I'd done a lot of work with him. And Nick Kershaw had recommended me. I said, oh, brilliant. And then he said, and then one evening I got in from the pub and I turned the TV on. And I thought, oh, that's that bloke that everyone's met on the telly with Tom Robinson. And that's how I got the job. And I was so determined not to do that job. And that's a big lesson, you never know. You never know.
Your life has actually been sort of characterised in some ways by, serendipity, moments of serendipity with musically. So you got into King Crimson via an interesting route as well. And you ended up working with Robert on a collaborative album first before you were in King Crimson. So what was your first entree to King Crimson proper, if you like? How did that sort of happen?
Well, it stemmed from that thing. I'd ended up in a band where this band called the Schizoid Band, where everybody had been in that. Ironically enough, everyone in the band had been in King Crimson apart from me. And the idea was it was playing the older material that the then current Crimson didn't play. And one morning, after the first lot of rehearsals, I got a phone call from Robert Fripp. Again, I'd never spoken to him in my life. Huge hero of mine. And he asked me how rehearsals were going. I said, the honest answer is, Robert, it's been 3 of the most unpleasant weeks of my life. And he said, yes, I thought that might be the case. And so we kind of bonded over that. And because he kept saying, I'm the only person that's experienced what he's experienced. I can't be the only sane man in the asylum, So he became, for a while, my kind of personal King Crimson Samaritans, where I could phone him up. And that's how it started, really. And then I think, I'm trying to remember the chronology of this. The second drummer in Schizoid Band was a guy called Ian Wallace. He was a lovely bloke. But he died rather tragically, and I organised the memorial in England, and I sang a song with Mel Collins accompanied me, and we did a King Crimson song called Islands, which is on the album that Ian played. And Robert was there, and he invited me to his house, and we got chatting. And then one day he phoned me up and said, did I want to go to his studio down in Wiltshire and just improvise? I said, okay. And I went down, and I wasn't sure what to expect. And Robert's in the corner with, I don't know if you've seen Robert's rig, which he calls the Solar Voyager, which is huge. It was about half a dozen volume pedals. The whole thing, this looks so complicated. And so he was creating these soundscapes, and we were improvising over it, and some of it we did without that. And at the end of the day, as I was leaving, he gave me a box. And I said, what's this? He said, it's the hard drive containing what we've done today. I said, okay, what do you want me to do with it? He said, I'm sure you'll think of something. And so, it was like a kind of kung fu grasshopper moment. And so I went home, and I decided not to do, the obvious thing struck me was to chop it up. That section's got a bit of a vibe now. But I thought, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stay true to how it developed organically. So I started writing music on top of it. I started improvising vocals, improvising lyrics, really. And then I started doing it in sections, like a kind of my own personal kind of consequences. So I'd do it in sections, then I'd do it, and then at the end of the week, I'd play it all back. And Robert really got off on it, and that became a thing. And then I'd put fake drums on it, and I said, can we put real drums on it? Can we use Gavin? And Gavin had just been in a previous version of Crimson. And then Robert said, well, let's get Tony Levin to play bass on it. And Tony's, I remember the excitement of Tony's bass parts turning up, where he would, sometimes he would play the parts I'd come up with, but do it in his own style. And other times he would play something I would never have come up with in a million years that was absolutely brilliant, And we ended up with this album, and there was talk of maybe touring that, some emails kind of exchanged. And it would have been almost the lineup of the next Crimson. The next thing that happened was, that was the question, right? I've taken so long explaining this.
No, you're all good.
I'm in the right place. Okay, so the next thing that happened was, I think the manager, David Singleton, was in Japan doing some business, I think, kind of renegotiating Crimson's deal out there. And he was out there at the same time as Steve Hackett. And Steve was doing the whole Regenesis thing, which I also was part of. I sing on that album and did some appearances with Steve. And he came back and was telling Robert, he went to see the show and said, it's really good, And Robert said, well, there ought to be a band doing that with Crimson stuff. So he decided to put a band together that he wasn't in, but he was, he was going to be. So we had a meeting, and it was John Wetton, Mel Collins, Gavin Harrison, and myself. And we had a couple of meetings. I think we had a rehearsal around at Gavin's. And at one point, I think Robert just thought, actually, I'd quite like to do this myself. And poor old John got the elbow. And I got a phone call saying, I'm reforming King Crimson. Do you want to be the lead singer and second guitarist? And so, of course, I said, well, if you like. Now, of course, I jumped at the chance because it's like this mad childhood dream. And it's been absolutely extraordinary.